listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
And we are live from America and just outside the Matrix. It is time once again for the show that brings you the truth. Maybe too much truth today, it's possible. Behind the headlines, I'm investigative journalist Lee Stranahan. This is The Backstory. So let's talk to our intrepid producer, Rod. Hey, Rod, how you doing?
I'm doing good, Lee. How about yourself?
I'm good. So I'm kind of fired up. I'll talk about that in a second. But it's a great show today. The often equally fired up Mark Sloboda will be on straight out of Moscow, I think, straight out of somewhere in Russia. But you never tell. He moves about the country. He's amassing himself somewhere on the border of Moscow, possibly, with the battalion of crows, because he does have some. Mark Sloboda does own crows, more than one. And apparently they're showing up on satellite images, and we're about to go to war with Russia over it. So I'm not sure. It could be all Mark's fault. That's not quite accurate, but it's close, unfortunately. Then, in the second hour, we have an actual candidate. Right, Rod?
Yes, we do. We do have a Republican candidate from New Jersey.
That's right. And it's nice to have a candidate for anything from anywhere. Darius Mayfield will be with us. He's been with us before. And you're right. He's running up in New Jersey. We'll talk to him. And we're taking your calls, 202-521-1320. It's The Backstory. So let me start by explaining some of my fired upness. I had a thought last night, because, you know, I watch people on the social media, and I see people's conversations. And I'm going to say something, and I don't mean this in a elitist way. I mean this in a literally true way. I'm not like most of y'all. And that could sound jerky or whatever, but let me explain what I mean. I'm different than most people in the audience in that I have firsthand experience. So, for instance, I'm going to give you an example from Russiagate, Rod, right? Almost everybody's heard of Guccifer 2, right?
Correct.
You know what I'm saying? Guccifer 2, the person the government says is behind the hack of the DNC. Now, everybody's heard of Guccifer 2. I've communicated with Guccifer 2. Does that make sense? In other words, literally, I exchanged messages with Guccifer 2, and Guccifer 2 sent me files. And that doesn't make me better than anybody. It makes me different, though, because most people know about Guccifer 2 secondhand or thirdhand. They've heard about Guccifer 2. And so they form theories, right? On Syria, for instance. And I haven't been to Syria, but I've been to Beirut back in 2013. So when most people talk about Syria, people have heard about Syria, and they've heard about the Syrian civil war. I went on the ground and spoke to Syrian refugees. I didn't go to Syria, but the reason I went to Beirut is I thought it was safer because journalists were getting kidnapped at the time in Syria, so I decided not to go there. And I stand by that decision. But then I went into Lebanon and I spoke to people who were Syrian refugees. So, for instance, I'd read about a town called Malula. I interviewed people from Malula. I had very hot Turkish coffee with them in Lebanon. I went over Mount Olive and met with them at a secret location. People who've been living in Malula. Malula is a town that I read about. It's outside Damascus, about a half hour, I understand. Again, I've never been there, but I spoke to people who were from there. And so a lot of people have seen stuff about Syria, or they've heard stuff about it. I know stuff about it from hearing from people very directly when I went there. And when I went to Syria, I spoke to people like Louis Sacco, who's at the time the Patriarch of Babylon. He was a high church official in what was essentially the Syrian Catholic Church. And essentially, it's complex. It starts to get into a whole papal org chart where this person's they don't answer to Rome, but they're adjacent. I don't know. It's confusing. I'm not a Catholic anyway, but so the org chart's really confusing to me. But anyway, I spoke to Louis Sacco, and I'm going to tell you what I learned firsthand. And so one of the problems this presents for me, Rod, is sometimes I'll talk to people, and let's say Guccifer 2 comes up. Well, people will say to me, well, there was no hack. It was an insider. And they say it definitively. And I say, well, what about Guccifer 2? And they'll spout off something, but they don't know what the hell they're talking about. Literally, they have a theory. I got files from Guccifer 2. So whoever Guccifer 2 was had files from the DNC, and they gave them to me, and I looked them up, and nobody else had them. And then later, Guccifer 2 released those files on Twitter. I watched it happen, and those files were confirmed from the DNC. So whoever Guccifer 2 was, I know that entity. And I'm not saying they hacked the DNC. I don't know. But they had files from the DNC, and they gave them to me before anybody else had them. And then they later released those files, and they were exactly the same files that I had, and they were reported on, and they were confirmed by the DNC to be real legit files. So when I hear people say, for instance, oh, no, it was Seth Rich, I just point out, look, I talked to Guccifer 2. I talked, all I mean is message. I never talked to anybody. But I exchanged messages in real time live with them. By the way, at the Perkins in Twin Falls, Idaho. That's where I was. Because I remember I was at dinner with people at Perkins. It was a big hangout spot, by the way, which tells you something about Twin Falls, doesn't it, Rod?
Real classy.
Well, you know what? Name a better place in Twin Falls. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I can't do that.
Right. So you see the problem. It could be the classiest option. Does that make sense?
No, I get that. I was in a town of 10,000 people in Minnesota, so I used to go to Dairy Queen. That was a fine establishment.
I used to live when I lived out in New Mexico. We lived in Los Lunas, New Mexico, which is about a half hour outside of Albuquerque, because we couldn't find a place we liked in Albuquerque. We wanted to be Albuquerque close, within a half hour, but we couldn't find a place there. And we found a great big house. That's what my second wife, wanted. So sure, I was that kind of guy. Sure, yes, dear. You want a big house? Sure. So we found one in Los Lunas. Los Lunas, there was nothing in Los Lunas. Nothing. The shopping was Walmart. Now, people can diss Walmart, but sometimes it's the only freaking option you have. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I get it.
And at that point saying, Walmart, and snorting, I'm not saying you did this, Rod, but if someone snorted and said,
that's...
I only shop at Whole Foods, let's say. Like Jason Goodman. You know Jason lives in a building where the first Whole Foods in New York was?
Yeah, he said that on the show the other day.
Yeah, I can't remember whether he said it here or the show he and I host. It all blurs together for me. So I mentioned this about Syria specifically to point out something. I went over to Lebanon in 2013 to cover that story because I wanted to get on-the-ground experience. And by the way, I've told our boss here at Sputnik that I'm ready, willing, and able to go over any place. I would even although I'd be a little afraid. I'd even go to Ukraine. I'd even go to Kiev. But I'd certainly go to Moscow. I'd feel very safe there. Where would you rather be, Russia or Ukraine?
Oh, no, I'd rather be in Russia. But I will say this about Ukraine. Again, like I said, I'm a mixed martial arts advocate and boxing fanatic. I've been following it my whole life. And boxing in Ukraine is a big thing. And I have seen black boxers go over there. So I don't know. It's kind of a weird thing. Then they don't really come back with any accounts of, any racist things happening to them. So it's weird.
Well, that's because they're the wrong race. I'm just saying. And we got Mark Sloboda joining us in just a couple minutes here. But where I would like to go is eastern Ukraine, the Donbass, into that region. But without, and by the way, that's probably the most dangerous place to go. But I'd bring a camera and a nice lens, and I'd shoot photos, and I'd shoot some video. I bring the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera 4K that I have, which, by the way, is putting out a very weird image of me right now. I just put it up on the video feed. Saul, take a look at the video feed. That's a weird image, right? Yep. That's like a non-color corrected. There's something wrong with whatever I'm getting from there. It's like raw video that's not even cropped properly, but whatever. But I'm going to tell people what I learned in Syria firsthand. And I know everyone out, and this is the problem, Rod. When I talk to someone about Guccifer 2, or you know where people do this all the time is when I talk about Andrew Breitbart. So I haven't heard of Andrew Breitbart. I was friends with Andrew Breitbart. I talked to Andrew 3 hours before he died. Andrew and I used to talk every day. But I'll meet people, and they'll say, oh, he was killed by the deep state or whatever. Obama killed him. And I'm like, no, he had a heart condition. He was in the hospital. And they're like, no, Obama killed him. And I'm like, I knew Andrew. I spoke to him 3 hours before he died, and he said he'd been on a plane the night before, and he'd felt a pang in his heart. I know that he was in the hospital because we used to talk every day when he was in the hospital. And I know he didn't want the word to get out that he was in the hospital. And they say, no. And they blow me off even though I knew. See, if I talked to somebody and they were like, no, I knew Andrew, I'd be like, oh, really? So tell me what you know, person who might know more than I do. That would be my approach, Rod. Does it make sense?
Yeah, I've been seeing that over the years. People, they get attached to something or someone, and they act like they know better than someone like you who was close to Andrew Breitbart.
And I'm not saying neener, you know, I knew Andrew Breitbart, nah. I'm saying I actually knew him, therefore I have not. If someone, you know, I can think of places, if someone was like, I'm from a city, like when I talked to Mark Sloboda, when I talked to him about Moscow, you notice I don't tell him about Moscow. I ask him about Moscow. If he says it's 32 degrees Fahrenheit here right now, I don't say, no, it's not. Because he's in Moscow. So I try to ask people questions and not tell them things. And that gives me a weird perspective. So I'll talk more about this later. We're about to talk to Mark. And I don't know if it's 32 degrees. It warmed up here. It got up to like 34. So that was much warmer than when it was like -1 just 12 hours before that. But here's what I know. And I know it not the way a lot of people know it, secondhand or thirdhand. I saw it in Syria. The U.S. government lies about wars, and we support bad guys. When I went over to Lebanon, we were supporting the Salafi. George Galloway refers to them as head choppers. That's because they like to chop people's heads off. And everyone I talked to, Louis Saka, the Patriarch of Babylon, said, why is the U.S. supporting these guys? And I didn't know, because it wasn't my decision. But my point is, he was doing the same thing in a sense. He was asking me, you're from America, why are you guys supporting this? Here's what I know firsthand. America lies and supports bad guys. And that's why when I look at the situation, and we'll talk to Mark about this because I am fired up about it, I don't think Tucker Carlson's under a lot of fire, and God bless him. He's being called, Jim Acosta did something disgusting last night. And I'll talk about it. He's calling him Comrade Carlson and all that stuff. Tucker Carlson's not going far enough, and I'll talk to Mark about it. And Mark may get me more fired up. Could be one of those shows. We'll talk to Mark Svoboda when we come back on The Backstory.
Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
Deshaun, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No. It's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, I mean, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show by any means necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts and stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
And we are back on The Backstory. Joining us now, I believe in Moscow, but somewhere in Russia. Great friend of the show, and one of the guys, again, our interpreter producer, Rod, does a great job putting the show together for you guys every day. And today, I'm really glad Mark's on, because I wanted to talk about this with Mark. Specifically, I thought it'd be good to talk to Mark about this. Hey, Mark, how you doing?
Lee, thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on The Backstory.
Okay, Mark, so let me hit you with a theory, and you know this stuff really well, and you know it from firsthand experience. So, and this is what I was talking about at the beginning of the show. For instance, when a lot of people, like, I've never been to Crimea, for instance. I've never been there. You, on the other hand, have not only been there, but your wife's from Crimea, right?
Yeah, I'm there all the time, yeah.
And so you have knowledge about things that I have in a second or third-hand way. And this is going to be one of those subjects where you know way more than me by virtue of the fact that you have experience there, actually. And my experience is from talking to people. I want to talk about Eastern Ukraine for a second, something you know a bit about. And part of the thing about being there is you understand, I think, the attitudes of people. So I was watching Tucker Carlson get attacked by this guy, Jim Acosta, on CNN. And the New York Times is attacking him, too. And they're saying these people are too pro-Russian. They're saying they're Putin puppets. And, you know, they're calling Tucker Carlson comrade and asking, literally Jim Acosta was calling him comrade. And comparing Tucker Carlson saying he's supporting the Bolsheviks. Now, again, we've talked to you about this, Mark. If I were to say to you, Vladimir Putin's a Bolshevik, you'd kind of laugh out loud, right? That's absurd.
Yeah. My wife is an actual communist, and Putin is kind of, well, if not the opposite, then very much not aligned with the actual communists in Russia, the communists being the main opposition party to United Russia and the second largest party in the Russian Duma, the Russian Congress, if you will.
Now, that's exactly right. And people need to understand this. So when someone like Ted Cruz says Putin's a communist, to anybody who knows anything at all, it's not hard to look up. In fact, one of the things I've noted is that Putin's made statements on issues like women, and I'm not saying these are Bolshevik commie issues, Mark, but on stuff, he's specifically criticized woke culture, right? And transgender athletes. Those are things Putin's talked about publicly, right? Anybody can look that up.
Yeah, I mean, Putin has criticized some elements of what you might call woke or progressive culture in the U.S. I'm not quite sure that he has as good an understanding of it as we do. I think he's a little more concerned about far more important things, than how many genders you can rattle off. But he has made some comments on it.
No, but one of the reasons I mentioned that, and one of the things I saw him talking about woke culture, he was talking about the problems that they had, as he perceived it, under the Bolsheviks. And he related some of the problems he sees with woke culture to, he was critical, right? I think he's got a fairly, in other words, he'll come out and criticize some of the USSR's past, right? Because all it can be is past, since there's no USSR anymore. But
he has a very nuanced view of it, and he will talk up many aspects of it, and he will talk down other aspects of it, as most Russians do.
Yeah, and that's why I use the word critical, not attacking, but, right? Does that make sense? A critic, if you're being critical, you can say, if you're criticizing a movie, let's say, you can say, I liked this aspect of the movie. I didn't like this aspect of the movie. I thought it was beautifully shot, cinematography, but I didn't think the script was good, right? And that's not attacking the movie. That's being, like you say, nuanced. So let me be a little less nuanced about Eastern Ukraine. Tucker Carlson's been getting attacked. And what Tucker Carlson's argument is one that I'm seeing Republicans who are getting attacked as being pro-Russian. They're not pro-Russian. What they're saying is, why are we defending the border? Why should the U.S.? It's none of our business to defend the border in Ukraine. And I want to point out, and I think you'll agree with me, because I heard the Mark, so let me guess where your um's going. This is not about, the U.S. is not allying with people who are trying to defend a border. They're allying with people who are murderers, who are Nazi murderers. The people in charge of things over in Eastern Ukraine there, Right Sector, they were in the Maidan. Right Sector is very clear about their ideology. They wave the blood and soil flag. They talk about their disdain for Russian speakers. And they want to, in part of Ukraine I saw recently, they put up signs about, there were some people in Liev or Lviv or whatever you call it, in Western Ukraine that speak Russian. And these Right Sector thugs went around and put up signs in their windows saying, these people do not respect the Ukrainian language.
Yeah, and those signs were the were the white, blue, and red of the Russian flag, but they were in the shape of pigs. Yes.
Right. There we go. And so you know what I'm talking about.
Yep.
So what I'm saying is, it's to me not enough just to go, well, it's none of our business. Sure, you can make that argument the U.S. shouldn't be involved, but I think it implies that somehow what Ukraine is doing to the people in eastern Ukraine is justifiable in any way. They are murdering civilians. They are murdering children. One of the reasons they're murdering children is because there aren't children in the Ukrainian military. So if the battle's between the Ukrainian military and these right sector militias, there's no 9-year-olds in the Ukrainian military. But when they're shelling people's apartment buildings, right, which is what they're doing, there are 9-year-olds in apartment buildings. So it's not an accident. I saw somebody say, no, there's atrocities on both sides. And I was basically like, screw you. There's not atrocities on both sides. One group is shelling civilians, and the other group is defending themselves against the people shelling civilians. So am I wrong, Mark? Tell me.
Well, I'm okay. So I would say that there is a difference between atrocities and casualties of war. And the defense forces of Donbass, they are shelling, this Kiev regime forces that themselves are ensconced in residential areas as well. So there is a certain amount of children that are killed on both sides unintentionally. But what the Kiev regime forces are clearly doing is rises closer to the level of atrocity. Maybe not genocide per se. That would, I think, be taking it too far. There are a few incidences that, like the Odessa massacre, that probably should be investigated as acts of genocide. But it definitely amounts to ethno-political cleansing, where when they're shelling wholesale infrastructure and residential areas, they are trying to drive the people out and into Russia. And it has to be remembered that several million, about 3 million Eastern Ukrainians have fled since 2014 into aggressor Russia, not because of Russia, but because the regime backed by the United States that seized power in 2014 is trying to shell them either into submission, right, accept the overthrow of the government that you here had elected, and accept that we took power, or go to Russia. And the comedian turned president Zelensky has said that outright. If you feel yourself to be Russian, then leave our country, go to Russia, which, Ukraine has long been a multi-ethnic country. I mean, ethnic Ukrainians are the majority, and ethnic Russians are, the second, the biggest minority, if you will. But there are several other minorities in the country: Hungarians, Ukrainian Greeks, and so on. And they're trying to turn this into and the Crimean Tatars, of course. They're trying to turn this into an ethnic nationalist thing. There are two different conceptions of Ukrainian national identity at war in Ukraine right now. One of them is monist. It is singular. It is ethno-nationalism. Everyone in Ukrainian needs to be Ukrainian and speak Ukrainian. And anyone who is not needs to either be absorbed and Ukrainized or driven out of the country or killed, whatever it takes. And the other conception of it is a little bit more complicated, but it's actually what most of modern Europe is based on, that you have multicultural countries where, these are not immigrants. These are peoples who have been here as a result of history for long periods of time, right? And, they have, for long periods of their history, lived in relative peace. And the state is, responsible to make sure that that continues. And that is a broader conception of Ukrainian national identity, particularly where East Ukrainians say, Russians, they're just like us. They're us on the other side of the border. My wife, my cousin, whatever, are Russian. It's pretty hard to tell over here who's Ukrainian and who's Russian. These are two competing conceptions of Ukrainian national identity. And back to poor Tucker. And Tucker, God knows I don't agree with everything Tucker says on a whole host of issues, but I have to agree with him on this particular one. But I'm a little shocked at your reaction, Lee, because I mean, it's simply indisputable that anyone who criticizes U.S. foreign and military policy around the world is a traitor.
I know, but so here's the thing. I have limited patience for that since I work for Sputnik. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, in other words, and again, and I get it. And first off, I know Tucker a little bit. I've talked to him privately, and we've exchanged emails. And when I used to work at Access Hollywood, Billy Bush, who was over there, went to prep school at Tucker, and I got to know him a little tiny bit there. And I like him personally, and he was very nice to my friend Andrew Breitbart right before Andrew died, where they both went to see Saul Alinsky. And so it's not, and I will say this, Tucker is by far and away the bravest person in mainstream media. But he's not, me personally, who came to work for Sputnik during Russiagate at a time when I would go into the White House when I was with Breitbart every day, and I could see the Russian attacks every day live, up close and personal from the media. Jim Acosta, I've talked to Jim Acosta at the White House. I went to work for Sputnik, and by the way, I wouldn't have necessarily gone to work for any other just random countries. There are countries I would have said, no, I'm not going to go work for them. I don't feel comfortable working. Like I wouldn't, if Saudi Arabia had a TV network, I wouldn't want to work for them.
But Saudi Arabia are good friends of the U.S. Why wouldn't you go to work for the dictatorship of Saudi Arabia?
Well, because I know about the history of Wahhabism, and I know what the Muslim World League was up to, and I've reported on it. So I know the truth. So one of the reasons I went to work for Sputnik is I'd been to Lebanon, and I could see that in the Syrian war, Russia was on the right side, and America was on the wrong side. We were on the side of the Salafi head choppers, including ISIS. I could see that the U.S. was, and Russia was not running out. And I think I'm realistic about the problems that Assad has. And I think I'm realistic about the criticisms of Putin within Russia. Like I've talked about, there were protests against Putin last year, but it's looking at it, it seemed to be about pensions and stuff like that. It was not about people wanting to be free to have Navalny as president or something. So I can tell the difference between the BS and just any criticism whatsoever. And I went to work for Sputnik at a time when Russiagate hysteria was at a height. And people who are, again, people who I know, Roger Stone, were getting sentenced to prison and stuff like that on stories that I got him involved in. And it was so Tucker's relative bravery doesn't quite go far enough for me. And I know that you're going to be attacked, but here's what I know. By cowering and giving into those attacks and saying basically, no, I'm not saying Russia's doing anything right. I'm saying, of course, we should be defending the border of Ukraine. I just don't think it's our business. Like, of course, Ukraine has a right to a border, but that's not what it's about, is my point. And let me use the term from the Gulf War and get your reaction on this. The Ukrainian military forces that you say are getting shelled by the separatists, I don't even like that term, but let's go with it. Are they using...
I prefer the Donbass militia because...
Right, the Donbass militia.
Because technically they're not actually fighting to separate from Ukraine. They're actually fighting to be part of Ukraine again, but a Ukraine where they're federalized Ukraine where their rights, cultural, political rights are protected. They feel they have to do that because the last time they participated in the democratic process and elected president, he was overthrown in a violent and unconstitutional constitutional putsch, largely from political forces from the far side of the country with open foreign support. That's why they feel they need it.
That's right. And with open anti-ethnically Russian beliefs, right?
Yes.
Here's what and by the way,
leftist, it must be said.
What's that?
And anti-leftist, it must be said.
Yeah, anti-leftist, but not, like I say, to me, I'm always, I know it's right sector, but it's also, I think, I think the problem in the U.S. is the left, largely. And I think
I would argue there is no left in the United States unless you're talking maybe Jill Stein.
Yeah, well, and
there are liberals and there are Republicans, but there is no organized left in the United States.
Well, there is, and when I said left, I mean I covered Black Lives Matter protests for a couple of years, and I would see Patrisse Cullors, her mentor was Eric Mann, who was part of the SDS and then part of the Weather Underground. And the Weather Underground, I would say, they were avowedly, they were communists. But again, that's about, and Patrisse Cullors has talked about being a Marxist organizer, and she clearly is. And so, and they were trying to foment a violent revolution, and they're very clear about this, with Black Americans as the vanguard of the revolution. That's what the breakaway from the Weather Underground is all about. But that takes us into all I'm getting at, Mark, is that I think the terms left and right have a slightly different meaning on the continent in Europe than they do in the U.S. You know what I'm saying?
They definitely have a very different meaning.
Yeah, because the people on the right sector, for instance, when I say they're openly anti-ethnically Russian, I mean, I posted on Twitter the Ukrainian chick with a Nazi tattoo on her butt. And I've seen lots of Nazi tattoos. You know what? When I look up videos of right sector, I see lots of young dudes with Nazi tattoos flexing their muscles. Have you noticed that? They like to flex their muscles.
Well, that if you're going to wear a Nazi tattoo, I guess you're of the type that wants to flex it. What can I say? I won't want to put everyone. Go ahead.
Right, and I also see the blood and soil flag. If anyone looks at any of the footage of the Stefan Bandera marches they have on January 1st to celebrate his birthday, the images are Stefan Bandera in front of a blood and soil flag. There's a black and white background behind, red and white, forgive me, red and black.
Red and black, yes.
Red and black.
Which was the colors of the Ukrainian insurgent army and the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, who were the Nazi collaborators in West Ukraine in World War II, who committed the Holocaust, who massacred Jews, Poles, ethnic Russians, East Ukrainians, leftists. They sung about it. They sung about the glory of slaughtering Jews and Poles and Russians.
And I've looked into and by the way, if anyone wants to lose their lunch, the way they slaughtered them, it was...
They made the SS that they were allied with blush.
Right. It was really, I mean, I saw stuff where pregnant women were cut open and animals put inside them, like that kind of thing. When I say you'll lose your lunch, like seriously, you want to talk about atrocities, like that kind of thing. And they're doing it to send a message, right? That was,
that is political terror.
And right sector, and anyone can look it up. Even Radio Free Europe has a video up on YouTube.
It's not just right sector; it's Azov and many other groups. C14, the 14 Words of White Supremacism, which is a Ukrainian group. There's many others, but they're fully integrated into the military, the security services, the police. Azov almost entirely is the National Guard now of Ukraine, but also the mainstream Maidan political parties. The number 2 of Petro Poroshenko's, the candy oligarchs, European Solidarity Party, the number 2 on his party list is our old friend Andrei Parubi, the founder of the Social Nationalist Party of Ukraine, a known and unrepentant neo-Nazi. He was the head of the Maidan self-defense forces, quote unquote, on the Maidan, and then he was the speaker of the Ukrainian Putsch Rada.
And one of the only reasons I mentioned, because you're right, there's a number of groups. There's also the Svoboda Party. But
they're an ultra-nationalist West Ukrainian party, yes. Mm-hmm.
Yes, and the reason I mentioned right sector is, to my American ear, I can spell right sector. But if I say the Azov Battalion, right, a lot of people might hear that and they don't know. And the reason it's important to know how to spell it is if you go to YouTube and you type in right sector Ukraine, you'll find tons of videos. So don't take my word for it. And I can tell people, go type in right sector, and they know how to spell those words. Or if I say, go type in Azov, they got to guess. And they might guess right, but they might guess wrong. That's the reason. And it's in Ukraine. In Ukrainian, it's what, Pravy sector, correct?
Yes, Pravy sector. No. Yes.
Pravy. See, even that I can't pronounce right, because you talked about the difference. To use a common phrase that's not usually used in this context, I think one of the problems here for Americans is that Ukrainian, Russian, all those people look alike. Does that make sense?
Russia is composed of some 200 indigenous ethnic groups, and nearly 100 other, peoples of the Soviet Union and the Russian Empire, and other groups that aren't indigenous but have large populations here, like the Georgians, like the Afghans. There's actually a lot of Afghans in Russia. They're the largest minority that wasn't one of the peoples of the Soviet Union.
But from people on the outside, what I think, and I think this is correct, that what is a big, huge deal to some Ukrainians, these nationalist Ukrainians that we were talking about, the Nazi Ukrainians, it's a huge deal. But to a lot of people looking at it, they don't even grasp it, because if they heard them both at a shop talking, the average American couldn't tell the difference between someone speaking Ukrainian and someone speaking Russian, right? It's just not, neither one is their language, and they both sort of sound kind of the same. But they're,
and the chances are that the Ukrainian is probably speaking Russian too, because half of Ukrainians spoke Russian, at least up until 2014 anyway.
But these nationalist Ukrainians, they can tell the difference. And if they saw Ukrainians speaking Russian, they'd be pissed off about it, right?
In that part of the country, yes. In West Ukraine, yes.
Yes. I have a friend who is a wife who was Ukrainian, but she considered herself, she was on the USSR's gymnastics team at one point back in the day, and she considers herself Russian. And there is a big anti-Semitic element, because my friend Jason Goodman, he's Jewish ethnically, he's not observant, but his wife, there are some Ukrainians, the fact that he was Jewish, that'd be not they wouldn't want to touch that with a 10-foot pole, right?
Yeah. I mean, they are right ethnic nationalists in the true sense of the word, and there is a degree of anti-Semitism, but that's been really toned down, right, for the time being. They've attacked a few gypsy camps too, and murdered a bunch of people and everything. But this is why these people are so acceptable to Brussels and to Washington, D.C. And it's not only in Ukraine, in the Baltics too. You've got all these, people that glorify the people of the Baltics who served in the SS divisions, right? Because for these people, as long as the principal target of their fascist hatred and violence is ethnic Russians, Slovak Eastern Ukrainians, and leftists, then they're okay. They're our fascists, which is exactly what Dulles said in the 1950s when the U.S. was supporting West Ukrainians as the remnants of the Nazi collaborationist forces against the USSR in the early days of the Cold War. They're a useful geopolitical tool. It's the same thing as right-wing death squads in Central America and moderate jihadis in the Middle East or Afghanistan.
No, great point. Hey, Mark, I know it's late there. Always appreciate you coming on the show. And look, when Mark Sloboda's talking me down a little bit, you can tell I'm fired up. So, Mark, thanks for talking me down a little bit and bringing some nuance. Because I know you do feel passionately about these issues, too, right? Because you've
talking you down is impossible, Lee. I know that.
Well, no. Yeah, but... No, because I, you know what, Mark? I'll tell you what it is. I'm very upset that my country, the United States, is defending bad guys. I don't want my country to be on the side of those guys. Does that make sense? I take it personally.
I was born there too.
No. So you know how I feel.
Yes.
And so there we go. Mark Sloboda, thanks for joining us. We got more coming up right after this on the best damn radio show in the world. It's The Backstory.
Every day we ask questions.
How is Facebook going to prevent suicides?
Well, do you see this as being a human rights violation?
Are the cows really stinking up the planet that much?
To move ideas forward.
A gravitational wave is a ripple in the fabric of space and time.
I don't think the launch of the satellite proves anything at all.
Where do good ideas come from? We connect with independent thinkers, hear their ideas, and create stimulating debates on real issues.
The Dow is in a correction. As I said, commodities across the globe are collapsing. Why is that the case? Because we are in a global recession.
That is set to change because Iran has approximately about 50 million barrels, which it had put in storage during the height of the sanctions regime, and that's ready to be released as soon as possible.
Where is the money?
The super rich individuals and the world's biggest companies are able to hide money in tax havens.
Is there a solution to the crisis?
No, because I don't think anything useful has come out of any of the policy reform discussions with respect to financial reform.
They give us answers we aren't always prepared for.
What are the chances that the report would make Israeli authorities to review their policies towards the Palestinians?
Oh, probably zero.
This recession will be even worse than it was in 2008.
But that would be the nasty way for it to happen, you know. But because of Guantanamo, the U.S. is no longer taking so many prisoners, so instead of taking prisoners, they kill people.
A lot of people think that he's now unelectable and a bad leader.
Wow, that's just so much information to take in.
Pay attention, there'll be a test on this later.
Taking notes.
Welcome to the show.
Wow, this is crazy. We're definitely talking sci-fi over here. From 20 years ago, people would never have believed this. Crazy times we're living in.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around this story. This is a fantastic story.
Yes, it is a fantastic story, and it's a worldwide problem.
Welcome to the party.
And we are back, 105.5 FM, AM 1390. Thanks again to Mark Sloboda. We got Robert on, right, Saul? Is that correct? From D.C.?
Yes, Robert from D.C.
Okay, Robert, I will get to you in 1 second. I just want to cap this point, as I'm known to do occasionally. And by the way, thanks again to our multifaceted engineer, Saul, for helping me get the video working. Again, I have, questions. There may be limited value in being able to see me, but, it's nice. And it's nice to have things working. See, one of the things that happened, Saul, was I got a bunch of equipment a couple weeks ago, and I got this Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera and stuff like that, this new switcher that's over here, the ATEM switcher. And I got all this stuff, but because I'd come into some money. And so I got my equipment set up back to where it was when I lived in D.C. before all the divorce trouble started. And the problem is a lot of it's new equipment. And Saul, you know what it's like when new equipment comes in because you're a multifaceted engineer, right? You know what it's like.
Yeah, it's a lot of work. Sometimes you just got to leave it and not hook anything up.
Right, but usually, for budgetary reasons, I usually get like one thing every week or two. Does that make sense? Me personally, when I buy stuff, you're working a company where I'm sure you experience all the time, you and Andre, engineer Andre, experience what I did, which is I got all this stuff in at once. So now I've got all this cool equipment, most of which is still basically, it might as well still be in the box because I don't quite know how to work it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Usually I'll get like a box, like one thing, and because that's all I can afford that week. And then I have a week or two to figure that one thing out. I got like 9 things at once. And so some of them are I've got cool things in my apartment right now that are awesome that I haven't been able to do a damn thing with. Plus, I got my 24/7 radio station going on YouTube, radio station and news station, and that was work. So there's all this new technology I've had. But thanks again to our multifaceted engineer, Saul, for helping get the video feed going. Because, again, we're a radio show, so the video feed is kind of a bonus thing, but we like to do a good one. We like to do a nice one. And thanks again to Mark Sloboda for joining us and bringing some nuance to this. But I do feel emotional about this stuff because I cannot explain to people when I went to Lebanon how disappointed and disgusted and let down I was. And the thing was, at the time, because I'd been working for Breitbart and so on, I could blame it. And I voted for Obama in 2007, but quickly, you can see this in my work at Huffington Post, became very disappointed in Obama. So when I went to Lebanon, my disappointment continued, but it was aimed at the Obama administration. And when Trump came in, because I knew I'd be in D.C., and because at one point I'd had the backing of people like Bannon, before I realized what a snake in the grass he was, I was actually hopeful for change for a minute. I thought, okay, the problem's in Syria, it's the Obama administration. Unfortunately, the problem's America. I'll say that again. The problem is the United States of America policy. Anybody can go over to the CIA archive. Just type in on a website, CIA archive. Go to the FOIA request section and type in L-E-B-E-D, Lebed. Nicole Lebed is his name. When you type it in, you'll find the Village Voice article that goes into some great detail in this from the 80s that was published. And I got to tell you, I wish my country, because I love America, because I'm from here and I love America, but I wish we'd stop supporting the worst side in all of these conflicts. In Syria, we were supporting, I don't even care if you go, well, Assad, blah, blah, blah. You know what? The people we're supporting were worse. Period. They were worse. And in Ukraine, and people usually back and they go, well, Putin, and then they spew some BS they've read about Putin. I got to tell you, from having looked into Putin and researched stuff, almost all of the claims about Putin start with people who, A, went to college with Bill Clinton, Strobe Talbot, and David Satter at Oxford, or the Atlantic Council or these other groups. There's so much BS about Putin. There's so many lies about him that to get to the truth, you've got to dig through 20 layers of lies. And again, I've come to respect and have admiration for Putin as a world leader. And I like a lot of things that I see, because when I cut through the BS, and it's not a condition of me working here. I swear to God, I like Putin more than a lot of people who are in Russia, probably, because I've got the benefit of I don't live under him, so my pension's not affected, and it's not directly. And I love working at Sputnik, so you know, if Putin got mad and fired me for no reason, I don't know. If Putin was responsible for my divorce in some way I'm not aware of, if he was texting with my ex-wife, let's say, I might get mad at him. But right now, I'm an arm's length distance away. And just doing my own research, I like and admire the guy. And I've been very plain about that. It's not a condition of working here. Because again, I'm probably more on that side than most people who host here. They don't sit you down when you come to work at Sputnik and hand you autographed pictures of Vladimir Putin and have you give him a kiss in front of everybody and make sure you leave lipstick marks. Nothing like that. It's the best job I've ever had because I'm free. And one of the things I'm free to do is I'm free to not hate Putin. That's all. And that's what Tucker's doing, is not irrationally hating Putin. And that, Mark Sloboda pointed out, is enough to get him called Comrade Carlson and all that stuff. But it really does bother me that the United States always, in my experience, backs the wrong guys. And I see a lot of people looking at this situation with Russia and Ukraine, and they're kind of going, well, maybe Russia is really... And unfortunately, I saw in the Syrian conflict that the U.S. will just blatantly lie. They called the head choppers, the jihadists, the rebels. And again, these people in Ukraine, it's not the people of Ukraine, but these nationalist Ukrainians are very bad people. They're very bad people. And I would ask a knucklehead like Jim Acosta a simple question, because he's covering, hey, Acosta, I wish I were in the White House. If I were, I would talk to some of these people, and I'd ask them a simple question. I would walk up to some of these knuckleheads in the media, and I'd ask them one question. Do you know who Stefan Bandera is? I guarantee you these people who are covering the Ukraine-Russia so-called crisis, if you ask Jim Acosta who's Stefan Bandera, he has no freaking clue. And if you don't know who Stefan Bandera is, there's no way you can understand the situation. Because those tiki torch marchers, you go, why do they have a picture of a middle-aged bald guy in front of a red and black striped logo? You don't know who Stefan Bandera is. But I'll tell you who does know who Stefan Bandera is. The Ukrainian nationalists. They absolutely know and worship him. And when we come back, Robert from D.C., thanks for sticking. We'll get to you right after this break on the best damn radio show in the world. It's The Backstory.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
And we're back. I'm investigative journalist Lee Stranahan. You're listening to a show that brings you the truth, sometimes a little emotional truth. Behind the headlines, it's the backstory. Once again, I want to thank Mark Sabota for coming on. This hour, at the bottom of the hour, Republican candidate up in New Jersey, Darius Mayfield, will be joining us. We'll talk to Darius about a variety of things. And we may get into this foreign policy thing, because I'm very disgusted with the Republicans right now. Republicans, you're defending an Obama-Soros policy, and you're defending Nazis. Stop it. I'll talk to Darius about this a little bit. I don't want to, and unfortunately, Darius may be standing in for some Republicans, and I don't know what Darius even thinks on this, so I'll talk to him at the bottom of the hour. We're taking your calls, 202-521-1320. We got Robert, Ingrid, and Tarif. I'll get to you guys in just 1 second. It's the backstory. So, Saul, let me tell you the plan here. I'm going to talk to Robert. Then I want to get that long clip of Tony Blinken's address yesterday. The Secretary of State made a speech yesterday. It's about 7 minutes long. And then we'll go to that. Then I'll go to Ingrid and then Tarif. So, Ingrid and Tarif, if you hear Tony Blinken talking for a while, I've not forgotten you. I just want to get that out of the way early because it is like 7 minutes long. But I want people to hear Tony Blinken for themselves, and then I'll talk about it a little bit. But I want you to hear what the Secretary of State said in a sort of raw, unedited form yesterday. And it bothers me, not just because Ukraine's none of our business, because literally we're supporting bad guys. And I'll put it like this. If anyone wants to know why I'm emotional about this, go look at some of the photos from Donbass and see what's happening and see who we're supporting. It really does bother me tremendously. 202-521-1320. Robert in D.C., what is on your mind? Thanks for holding.
I'm just loving the show. I'm a loyal listener. This is the first time in almost 2 years that I heard you say that you love America, and that blew my mind when I heard that come out your mouth, because I'm like, what is going on in the world? I'm saying you one second you losing your double talk. Help me out here. 1 second you.
What's it?
Talk to me.
Well, first off, as Little Steven said in his song "I'm a Patriot," I love one of the reasons I love America is the reason I think most people who were born here love America, because they were born here. In other words, if I was a Canadian, I'd have feelings for Canada because I was born there. So I think whatever country you're from is the country you're from, right? So, and I think people who, I had a good talk with one of my therapists a few months ago, and we were talking about the idea, because I had a good childhood, and I love my parents. They're both gone now, but I love my mom and my dad. I was like a lot of people, not as close to my dad. He was a little emotionally, he's a guy who grew up in the 30s and 40s. So, a little distant sometimes. And he was really into golf, and I was never into golf. But I love my dad, and he loved me, and we were close later in life. We were close when we were growing up, but in the way a lot of people are, I think, with their dad. But we're talking about your relationship with your parents. And this therapist I was seeing said to me, if you hate your parents, you hate yourself in a way, because you're from your parents. So the idea that some people have at a young age that they can hate their parents, but it won't affect them. All it is, they hate somebody out there. That never seems to work out well. I've noticed that people who really hate their parents are screwed up. and I've married some of these people. People who really hate their parents are screwed up. And they're screwed up in a way that they can't quite tell. And I'll say that about your country, too. If you hate your country, it's going to affect the way you feel about yourself because you're from your country. And so, but I've given a lot of thought to where America went wrong. And I view a lot of it, this is why I've said this on the show before. I think the problem is England. And I see it right now. No Republican, certainly. Now that we know the UK intelligence was behind Russiagate, no Republican should be out there waving a Union Jack and talking about our special relationship with our close ally. England, you're not our ally. The UK is not our ally. And do you know who knew that as the Founding Fathers? So the ideals of the country, the things that it was founded on, I agree with and like that stuff. And I'll tell you who else did. And this is going to shock a lot of people, but it's historical fact. Ho Chi Minh. Ho Chi Minh, one of the first speeches he wrote was cribbed from the Founding Fathers documents. And it was talking about basically life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, stuff like that. And people aren't going to get that. But I think where it started to go really wrong was what Carol Quigley talked about, the Atlanticism, where they tried to pull us back into the fold. That's what I think of that. Does that answer that at all, Robert?
Hey, Lee, let me tell you, I'm an African American, but I'm part of your blood, and you know, some things just don't make no sense, man. Let's go back to the fact at hand. If they don't want to be like us, we don't have to make them like us. They can live their own life on the other side of the world. You understand? But
right, and no, I agree with that. Although, at a certain point, what I don't like is being morally neutral about people who are doing bad things. And unfortunately, the Ukrainian military is doing horrible things in eastern Ukraine, and I feel like saying it. And when you talk about, you know, the whole,
it's closer to America than Ukraine.
And let me talk about the fact that you're black for a second, because that's part of what I love about America. Actually, I've said this for years when I first started talking to Andrew Breitbart. A long time ago, before I was a journalist, I'll tell you who I communicated with and I wanted to interview, and we exchanged a number of emails, was Harry Allen, the media assassin from PE, from Public Enemy. And I exchanged a number of emails with Harry Allen wanting to interview him because I think a lot of stuff Public Enemy was saying, I'd never heard anything like it. And I was listening to it at the time, growing up listening to PE. And I was like, yeah, boy, there's important stuff here. And I think you can't discuss the history of America, period. And this is, you've heard me say this when we had barbecue people on. It's one of the reasons I love barbecue. One of the reasons I love barbecue is it's the most American cuisine, because it's obviously, I learned barbecue from Black Panther Bobby Seale in his book Barbecuing with Bobby, which I owned when I was like 17 years old. And it's a great barbecue book. And if I talk to Bobby Seale, and I don't agree with a lot of stuff, the Panther, look, Bobby Seale helped kill Alex Raxley and tortured him, a 19-year-old black man in Connecticut who was part of the Panthers. So I don't forgive that. On the other hand, I'm close with his book, Barbecuing with Bobby, because it was a fantastic book. And part of the reason I like barbecue, it almost goes to exactly what you're saying, Robert. It's got elements of black cuisine, black culture, including stuff that was from Africa that came over with the slaves. Part of that is that, and Bobby talks about that, especially with some of the side dishes, how they're direct descendants from the African dish. But it also has got elements of Spanish cuisine, German and Czechoslovakian cuisine. If you go down to hill country in Texas, Central Texas barbecue was heavily influenced by the Czechoslovak and German immigrants. That's why you've got sausage in barbecue. But on the other hand, when I was covering the Pigford story, I would travel around the country, and I was eating at soul food places like Bully's in Jackson, Mississippi, which is right down the street from where Medgar was killed. And I specifically, Southern, part of Southern culture is that you've got real soul food restaurants with good oxtail and stuff like that. In a way that, and by the way, and I'm not, because I know it's not just the South. I've been to Amy Ruth's. I've even ordered the Al Sharpton, which is chicken waffles at Amy Ruth's, the name of the dish there. That's up in Harlem. And because I'm a chicken and waffle expert, Robert. And that sounds stupid, but I am. I'm known at Roscoe's in Pasadena. And before Obama went there, before Snoop started talking about it, I'm known at Roscoe's. So there we go, represent 626. And but this is part of what I love. When I say I love America, I love the fact that we have a multi-ethnic cuisine barbecue that is very American. And I even enjoy Peckerwood barbecue. And not as much. I'll put it like this. Yeah, go ahead, Robert.
You gonna use firewood or you gonna use charcoal? That's not the discussion here. What we're talking about is you almost got me to lose my train of thought, but I'm back where we supposed.
By the way, firewood. By the way, but keep going.
I love you, but I'm part of your circle. I'm in your circle because I lost a little bit of the family off some, not supposedly loving, but they love me more than they love her. But that's
right.
I'm with some other stuff. Let's go back to where we originated, and that's what let them people live the way they want to live. If
which people are you talking about? Which people?
You guys.
Because I probably agree with you, but it depends which people you're talking about.
I'm talking about all people in general. Because you keep saying that, we're doing something wrong. I'm so proud to be the baddest of the bad guys. You know what I'm saying? And you are proud to be able to be part of the bad guys. That's so.
No, I know I'm not, because they're violating the very principle you're talking about. The people we're talking about here, if that applies to us, it applies if the people in the eastern part of Ukraine identify as ethnically Russian, let them. And these people won't let them. So I agree with you, but I disagree with you. And I don't agree with the bad guys because I agree with what you're saying. I'm in favor of letting people.
Going back. That's going back. You're going backwards again. Let's go forward. What we're trying to accomplish here is a peace. And we're the only ones that bring about that peace.
No, I don't agree at all. I think we create war. I think the United States and Great Britain, because notice how much Britain's pushing this. Great Britain is pushing arms. They're sending anti-tank weapons into Ukraine right now. And I agree, but Robert, I got to move forward because we're almost out of time. And I got to make sure I get this clip, which I said was long. This, Saul, I warned you. I said I was going to get to the clip because I knew things could go. But great call, Robert. Thanks for calling in. Let's hear, this is Anthony Blinken yesterday and his speech. Saul, hit it.
Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov and I met to discuss the crisis instigated by Russia's military buildup on Ukraine's borders and steps to de-escalate tensions and pursue diplomacy. Russia had previously outlined its concerns and proposals in writing, and last week I told Foreign Minister Lavrov that the United States would do the same. Today, Ambassador Sullivan delivered our written response in Moscow. All told, it sets out a serious diplomatic path forward should Russia choose it. The document we've delivered includes concerns of the United States and our allies and partners about Russia's actions that undermine security, a principled and pragmatic evaluation of the concerns that Russia has raised, and our own proposals for areas where we may be able to find common ground. We make clear that there are core principles that we are committed to uphold and defend, including Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity and the right of states to choose their own security arrangements and alliances. We've addressed the possibility of reciprocal transparency measures regarding force posture in Ukraine, as well as measures to increase confidence regarding military exercises and maneuvers in Europe. And we address other areas where we see potential for progress, including arms control related to missiles in Europe, our interest in a follow-on agreement to the New START treaty that covers all nuclear weapons, and ways to increase transparency and stability. We put these ideas forward because they have the potential, if negotiated in good faith, to enhance our security and that of our allies and partners, while also addressing Russia's stated concerns through reciprocal commitments. Our response to Russia reflects what I said in Kyiv, Berlin, and Geneva last week. We're open to dialogue. We prefer diplomacy. And we're prepared to move forward where there is the possibility of communication and cooperation if Russia de-escalates its aggression toward Ukraine, stops the inflammatory rhetoric, and approaches discussions about the future of security in Europe in a spirit of reciprocity. Our responses were fully coordinated with Ukraine and our European allies and partners, with whom we've been consulting continuously for weeks. We sought their input and incorporated it into the final version delivered to Moscow. Additionally, NATO developed and will deliver to Moscow its own paper with ideas and concerns about collective security in Europe, and that paper fully reinforces ours and vice versa. There's no daylight among the United States and our allies and partners on these matters. We shared our response paper with Congress, and I'll be briefing congressional leaders on this later today and consulting with them on our approach. As you know, there's strong bipartisan interest and deep expertise on the Hill when it comes to Ukraine and Russia, and we very much appreciate having Congress as a partner as we move forward. We're not releasing the document publicly because we think that diplomacy has the best chance to succeed if we provide space for confidential talks. We hope and expect that Russia will have the same view and will take our proposal seriously. I expect to speak to Foreign Minister Lavrov in the coming days after Moscow has had a chance to read the paper and is ready to discuss next steps. There should be no doubt about our seriousness of purpose when it comes to diplomacy, and we're acting with equal focus and force to bolster Ukraine's defenses and prepare a swift, united response to further Russian aggression. 3 deliveries of U.S. defensive military assistance arrive in Kyiv this week, carrying additional Javelin missiles and other anti-armor systems, 283 tons of ammunition and non-lethal equipment essential to Ukraine's frontline defenders. More deliveries are expected in the days to come. We provided more defensive security assistance to Ukraine in the past year than in any previous year. Last week, I authorized U.S. allies, including Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, to provide U.S.-origin military equipment from their inventories for use by Ukraine. Also last week, we notified Congress of our intent to deliver to Ukraine the Mi-17 helicopters currently held in Defense Department inventories, 5 of them. Additionally, the Secretary of Defense announced on Monday that 8,500 U.S. service members currently stationed in Europe and the United States have been placed in heightened readiness to deploy to ensure that we're able to support the NATO response force swiftly if it's activated by the North Atlantic Council to harden the Allies' eastern flank. Other NATO allies have also announced steps that they're prepared to take, and we expect more in the coming days. We've taken this step out of prudence. We hope those forces don't have to be activated for deployment. But if they are, we will be ready. We're also continuing to coordinate with our European allies and partners on severe economic sanctions to hold Moscow accountable for its actions. We've developed a high-impact, quick-action response that would inflict significant costs on the Russian economy and financial system. As part of our response, we're also prepared to impose export controls that will have a longer-term effect, denying Russia products that it needs to fulfill its strategic ambitions. On top of all of that, our allies and partners are also stepping up to provide assistance to Ukraine in various and mutually reinforcing ways. As we've done many times before, the alliance and individual allies are coming together to support our partners and to defend what should be inviolable principles that have helped provide unprecedented security, stability, and prosperity for decades in Europe and around the world. Finally, we're looking to support our allies and partners in dealing with the secondary negative consequences of Russia's destabilizing acts. For example, we know that Ukraine's economy and financial position is being affected by this crisis. And just as we're bolstering Ukraine's security, so too are we looking for how we can support its economy beyond the significant assistance we're already provided. Our European allies and partners are doing so as well. And that's another matter that I'll have an opportunity to discuss with Congress later this afternoon. As we're taking steps to ensure that the global energy supply isn't disrupted, that too is an important focus. Should Russia choose to weaponize its natural gas by cutting supply to Europe even more than it's already done? We're in discussions with governments and major producers around the world about surging their capacity. We're engaged in detailed conversations with our allies and partners about coordinating our response, including how best to deploy their existing energy stockpiles. All this effort is aimed at mitigating price shocks and ensuring that people in the United States, Europe, and around the world have the energy they need, no matter what Russia decides to do. All told, our actions over the past week have sharpened the choice facing Russia now. We've laid out a diplomatic path. We've lined up steep consequences should Russia choose further aggression. We've stepped forward with more support for Ukraine's security and economy. And we and our allies and partners are united across the board. Now, we'll continue to press forward and prepare. It remains up to Russia to decide how to respond. We're ready either way.
Well, now, so let me respond. Allow me to respond here on Radio Sputnik. You lying SOB. Let me just say that. First off, Blinken, I would ask Blinken 3 questions. I would ask him to explain to everybody listening who 3 people are. Explain who Stefan Bandera is and his significance to the situation. Now explain who Mikhail Khodorkovsky is and his significance to the situation. Now explain who George Soros is and his significance to the situation. Because you can't understand, Soros was the biggest funder of NGOs, which he was doing, by the way, before he started the Open Society Foundation and before Ukraine declared independence. Soros was in there for a couple of years. The International Renaissance Foundation, go look that up. Mikhail Khodorkovsky was the Russian oligarch billionaire who hates Vladimir Putin because Vladimir Putin put him in prison because Mikhail Khodorkovsky, at one point the richest man in Russia, would not stop interfering in the politics of Russia. And Mikhail Khodorkovsky has the Open Russia Foundation, and he's funded a lot of this stuff. I could throw in Viktor Pinchuk as well, since we're talking about billionaires, but let's leave him aside for a second. He was one of the biggest funders of Hillary Clinton. Viktor Pinchuk was a Ukrainian billionaire oligarch. Then, Stefan Bandera is and if he's unclear about that, go to the CIA archives, look up the name Stefan Bandera. You'll find a memo from 1944 in the CIA's records that mentions who Bandera is. They knew who Bandera was. Blinken knows who Bandera is. Blinken's whole thing was about it's all Russia's fault. Even calling Russia the aggressor in this, that is a phrase these Ukrainian Nazis use. Some of them don't even refer to Russia as Russia. They call it the aggressor nation. That's the only way they'll talk about it, which tells you something. 202-521-1320. Ingrid, thanks for holding, but I knew the pack of lies from Blinken was long there, so I want to get to that. What's on your mind?
Yes,
I laughed when you said that because, yes, if his lips are moving, he's lying. Earlier today, John Kiriakou asked the question, could it be that there's some elements in the U.S. who are afraid that diplomacy might prevail? Now, yesterday, there was a meeting between Russia, Ukraine, France, and Germany. I think it might have been in Paris. And at the end of the meeting, they said it was difficult, but they made some progress, and they agreed to meet again in 2 weeks. After this, you still have our media going, oh, the Russians are about to invade, the Russians are about to invade. And it's like the U.S. and the U.K. are on the outside of this meeting of the actual concerned parties, jumping around, trying to say we weren't included.
Provoke.
And
yeah.
I mean, UK scrambling to get as many weapons shipped to Ukraine as possible for fear that if they wait too long, there's going to be some kind of an agreement, because I would guess whatever kind of an agreement they come to about weapons, UK doesn't plan to take those offensive weapons back, and neither does the UK. And I don't know, you went, there was a lot between you and Robert. The thing is, I love this country too. I've traveled enough to feel like so fortunate and grateful to have been born here. And for an American citizen, this is like we are the most privileged people in the world. You know, maybe some little countries like Norway are okay, but by and large, we're just so fortunate. And this is why when you find out these things that your country that you have loved and you have believed in is doing something so reprehensible, it's like a betrayal, and it's very painful.
No, it is very painful, and that's what I was trying to express in my own weird way. There is that it really, and I felt it very strongly when I was over in Lebanon. One of the things that struck me in Lebanon was that the world wants to like America. I noticed this when I would go to like electronic stores and the grocery store and stuff like that, and I could see posters for American movies. And I tell people, when I started to figure out Lebanon, when I came back from Beirut, a lot of people told me that they asked, well, how was it? And they thought Beirut was literally like a camel and some shells. That was it. And I tell people, and I've said this to people, I think, on the air, and they knew exactly what I was talking about. I said, I knew Beirut was not the way I pictured it. When I was standing in front of the lingerie shop that was right down at the mall, that was a few doors down from the P.F. Chang's and the Cronut shop. Now, if you'd asked me if there was going to be a lingerie display in Beirut, I would have thought, no, it would be like burqas or something like that, which I'm not into. But and the P.F. Chang's was funny too, and I was at the mall, and the person, I was talking to somebody, they were like, and they named the mall, I can't remember the name of it, but it was, they knew exactly where I was talking about, because it's a real place. And that's very, in other words, it was very American. If you've been plunged into that mall, the average American would have gone, yeah, this is what I'm used to for the world. And it was in Beirut, Lebanon. And the world wants to like us, I think. And we make it very hard because they know the truth a little bit more than the average American, because they see it. Everybody I talked to over there, they didn't hate Americans. They were kind of like, what's wrong with you guys? And I didn't have a good explanation. I still don't. 202-521-1320. Tarif, thanks for holding on. We got a couple minutes. Go ahead.
All right. Thank you. I have two comments. First, I'd like to say free Julian Assange. My first comment is dealing with Poland. They might be facing a economic and energy crisis if the price of gas go up, because they tied themselves to the speculation market with they locked themselves in dealing with the low spot gas prices. They might be facing economic troubles throughout this year or beginning of next year. My second comment is, I was trying to get in contact with some other journalists for the other show for Fort Lauderdale Radio, and Anton Shakin, who I interviewed before, he sent me an article that's beautiful, man, dealing with, I won't say it's beautiful, but it gives you the historical context of the U.S. and how the current powers that be inside the United States is betraying the American heritage. And they go out through the history of how the United States used to work with Russia and other nations to try to build them up, and all of a sudden how they turned everything 180 degrees, and how the United States is not the original United States, how it used to be, by trying to promote humanity and things like that. And also, I have a question to ask you. What can I send this article to Sputnik Radio? And you don't have to give me the information online. Over the air. It can be done on the phones, whatever, while they can publish the article, because the article is well written, and it's worth to read, too.
Well, maybe on Twitter is the best. If you can send it to me, I can forward it on maybe or something like that. That might be the best thing, Sharif. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Sharif. Thanks for the call. Thanks for your patience. Thanks for waiting, as usual. Great call. Thanks to Ingrid for calling in, too. And thanks to Robert. Robert, call back anytime. We talked for a while, but we had more to talk about, but we were just running out of time. So I want everyone to hear Anthony Blinken for themselves. And once you know a little bit about some of this stuff, I'll say it again. We're backing the wrong people. And he's making it out like Russia's the entire problem. And if Russia would just back off. And his whole thing was condescending. You know what? America overthrew a democratically elected government in 2014. Viktor Yanukovych, you know, one of the reasons he was overthrown is he was an anti-Bandera person. They had made Bandera a hero of Ukraine, and Yanukovych reversed that. And that's one of the reasons Bandera is important. It's part of why this is outlined in Ukraine on Fire, the great Igor Lopatnik film. Watch that film. I challenge anyone, watch that film in Revealing Ukraine, which I'm in. But coming up right after this, Darius Mayfield, who's a Republican running for office up in New Jersey. We'll talk about how the race is going for him, what he's learned being a candidate, and we may even get into some of this international stuff. We'll see how that goes on The Backstory.
Stuck in traffic? No problem. Stay informed. Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik on 105.5 FM or 1390 AM in the Washington, D.C. area. Need more? Follow us on Facebook or check us out on SputnikNews.com.
They're bringing drugs. They're bringing crime.
I like beer. Yeah, we drank beer.
Whoever's in charge, and I want the report.
Let's talk about that. Discussing all the controversies and news across the disunited states of America. Tune in to Fault Lines every weekday from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern, only on Radio Sputnik.
In a media landscape filled with so-called journalists acting as stenographers for their billionaire bosses, there is a desperate need for news, analysis, and perspectives that buck the status quo and get to the heart of how domestic and international events impact you and me, as well as showing how we can get involved in the struggle to change that status quo. Check out By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik, Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, to hear the stories and voices that mainstream media refuses to tell you. And join us as we connect the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us. That's By Any Means Necessary, Monday through Friday at 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Hi, I'm political analyst Garland Nixon.
And I'm political scientist, author, and nationally syndicated columnist Dr. Wilmer Leon.
We're the co-hosts for The Critical Hour, airing Monday through Friday from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern Time here on Radio Sputnik in Washington, D.C.
We close out your day with a thorough and hard-hitting analysis of the day's top stories, where we bring in brilliant scholars, authors, and investigative journalists from around the world.
And on Fridays, it's panel time, when we do a roundup of the week's most important issues.
Join us to keep up with the world's top stories.
Enjoy an in-depth analysis.
And have a little fun along the way. Listen to our show,
The Critical Hour, Monday through Fridays on Radio Sputnik.
And we're back, final half hour of the best damn radio show in the world. It's The Backstory. Thanks again to all the callers today, Robert, Ingrid, and Tarif. And thanks to Mark Sloboda for joining us straight out of Moscow in the first hour. Joining us now straight out of Jersey, Darius Mayfield. Hey, Darius, how you doing? Welcome back to the show.
I'm doing well. Thank you guys for having me back on the show.
Well, so for people who may have missed the first time you were on, tell people what you're running for and why you decided to run, what your background is. Tell your story again. Let's just set that up by having you tell your story.
Absolutely. My name is Darius Mayfield, and I am running for Congress in New Jersey's 12th Congressional District as a Republican, specifically an America First Republican. My story is, one from humble beginnings. As I told you guys before, I come from very humble beginnings, single-parent household, welfare, Section 8, to my mom eventually creating our own school choice, which is probably my number one issue right now in education and school choice, whereas she was able to uplift us from the hood and move us to a suburban area, to the poorest part of that suburban area right next to the trailer park, so me and my sister were insured to get the education that we so wanted and we needed. 2016 was the first time I ever voted in my life in this country, because I was so energized by what I saw from the Trump campaign, what they were doing, what he was talking about, how he was talking about it. And, I come from New Jersey, so a lot of us know Donald Trump out here in New Jersey and the New York area. So one thing I automatically knew when seeing him speak is that what he said, he meant. And unfortunately, we don't have enough of that in our politics nowadays. As you can see, when Donald Trump was president, African-American unemployment was the lowest it's ever been. Female unemployment, the lowest it's ever been. Hispanic employment, the lowest it's ever been. We got criminal justice reform. We had the world, regardless of how the media tried to spin it, respecting us as a country and not doing some of the crazy things you see happening right now with China, with places like Russia. It just wouldn't have happened under somebody like Trump, because they understood who he was, and he really lived through the motto, peace through strength, which I also believe in myself. Part of the reason why I jumped into this race is, one, because I felt like the energy was right. After Trump's presidency, it was just a lot of America First people just popping up all over the place that really understood what that meant, whether they were Democrats, Republicans, black, white, Jewish, Christian, whatever it was. There's just a whole community of people that want to put America first and want to solve the ills of this country before going out there and trying to solve the ills of the rest of the world. And sitting here back in 2016, 17, 18, and 19, just watching how our elected officials, in some cases on both sides of the aisle, talk so disparagingly towards their constituents, regardless if they were in the same political party or not, just was something that didn't sit well with me and was really unbecoming of elected officials. So in 2016, I voted for Donald Trump. I got immediately involved in the grassroots movements here in the state of New Jersey. Last year, after I announced my campaign for Congress, I actually linked up with some of my local city council candidates, some assembly candidates, because we had elections all over this state last year. And I personally, from East Brunswick, New Jersey to Atlantic City, knocked on over 12,000 doors with them to ensure that our message was heard and to ensure that people knew the real us, not what the media makes it out to be, because I know nowadays conservatives, it's easy to call them domestic terrorists. It's easy to call us conspiracy theories. And, the fact is, as we sit here today in Joe Biden's America, we actually are sitting here watching him prove all of those notions wrong. We said that this disruption was going to cause a lot more than what we started to see in the beginning. And now as we see empty shelves all over our supermarkets, even here in places like New Jersey. We see higher gas prices, which we didn't have under the Trump administration. In fact, we were energy independent under the Trump administration, which for some reason, whatever their reasoning is, we aren't anymore. And we, in fact, have our government not only shutting down pipelines and things over here, costing people jobs and their livelihoods, but actively encouraging pipelines across the pond in places like Germany and Russia, which is just, for the average man and woman, just looking at some of these things, it's just nonsensical. And I got to say, Joe Biden is the gift that keeps on giving. And, I hope he keeps on giving, because I think he's going to usher us right into a red wave during these midterms. And we are all prepared for it. We are all looking forward to it. And for Republicans out there, and not just Republicans, but everybody, Republicans to me have the issues, whether it's lower taxes, whether it's school choice, whether it's term limits, whether it's our international policy. We have the issues, and we need to remember that and go forward in intelligence and go forward with empathy. And as I said, I believe in this midterm election, it's going to be a bloodbath for Democrats, and I think we'll carry that energy over into 2024, where we take back the presidency and hopefully start to put this country back on track.
Well, and Darius, you mentioned Russia a couple times. I'm going to come back to that. But how's the race going for you? What's it looking like at this point?
So the race is going well. After we just did our redistricting here in New Jersey, and, they seem to have made my district a little bit more Democrat, which I'm not surprised. But in fact, something that came out of that was we found out that the deciding vote, the judge that was the deciding vote on the redistricting, first of all, his initial reasoning for voting with Democrats was, his words, not mine, was that Republicans won last time. So thankfully, New Jersey Republicans had the heart to step up and file lawsuits against Democrats and this individual, where even the judge had to come out and say, you know what, you need to give us a better explanation than that. But through that, we also found out that my opponent, Bonnie Watson Coleman, had actually contributed and donated to that gentleman's wife earlier as well as many other Democrats. So, to be able to expose things like that and just keep showing the cycle of corruption, of backdoor deals, is exactly where we want to take this campaign. It's exactly the things we want to expose to people, no matter how big, how small. We're getting some great endorsements. I was recently able to sit down with somebody like Van Drew and his team. They've been actively helping me behind the scenes, get these numbers together, figure out where we've been in the last couple of midterm elections to, accurately try and guesstimate where we're going and what we need to do to actually win this race, how many votes we need, where we need those votes from. Since your show, I've been endorsed by Bishop E.W. Jackson, as well as Kim Klacik. We have some other strong endorsements coming from sitting members of Congress currently. So we're doing everything we need to do to the campaign to be a serious campaign, to be a campaign that's looked at as serious, that's looked at as viable. And, right now we're just in a spot where we're really focusing on the issues that matter to this district. So it's actually quite a balancing act, because there may be some issues there that don't traditionally that aren't traditionally thought of by some conservatives, things like criminal justice reform. And it's funny because I was just going back and forth on Facebook and social media today with some people about those things. But you know what? Again, as I said before, not only am I a America First Republican, I'm also a Trump Republican. And I really appreciate what he did as far as criminal justice reform and passing the First Step Act. So I think people need to understand that when they want to look at this party as growing, when they want to say this party is growing, they have to understand that there's other issues that come with that as well, which we are putting on display right now. And part of the reason, why we need to do that is because this is a serious campaign, and we're serious about winning this campaign. And I know my opponent and the New Jersey Democrats at large are not used to, one, a black Republican running against them, but two, a black Republican that can actually speak to some of the issues that they claim to care so much about. For instance, one of our topics here is housing and the homelessness problem here in District 12. Well, if we look at the last six or so years that my opponent, Ms. Bonnie Watson Coleman, has been in office, and received millions of dollars from HUD to tackle this problem, we found that since she's been here, we've increased from about 300 homeless people in this district to over 550, with the majority of them being congregated right in her stronghold in the area that she lives in, Trenton, New Jersey, and Ewing, New Jersey. So we're just going to keep focusing in on things like that, to start beating back Democrats at their own game, and to let people know that there is a viable, empathetic option for them to go to. And as I said before, Republicans have the issues. I seriously believe we have the issues to make people, especially in these underserved communities, black and brown communities, we have the issues to make their lives better. And all they're looking for is somebody that's going to be a true champion for them, show real empathy, and I think I'm the candidate to do that. So I couldn't be more happy with where my campaign is. We've started building out a team. We have our communications director, we have our social media director, we have our events planner, we have our field director, and they are all doing such an amazing job. We also just recently brought on 2 college coordinators who are college students themselves right now, and very accomplished in their young lives so far, whose job has been tasked with setting up meet and greets, setting up events at different colleges around the district. In fact, we just got word from Rider University and Rutgers University that they want to do something, Turning Point at Rutgers and Rider University. So we're just going to take this energy that we have, take this energy that we saw in the last administration, and march forward full force, doing any and everything, going into those places, those communities that Republicans aren't known for going in, to make sure our voices are heard and make sure we're having real substantive conversation. In fact, just a week ago, I was actually out in Trenton, New Jersey, with Councilwoman McBride, who's a Democrat and the president of the Trenton City Council. They were there actually protesting the Democratic mayor for locking people out of the park in Trenton, New Jersey, unnecessarily and without consulting anyone, not the city, not the parents, not the school boards, not the city council. So just basically being one of those little tyrants we see a lot of these Democrats being nowadays, thinking that they have all the power and they don't really have to answer to anybody. And we want to continue to stand up and show them that they do have to answer to people. They have to answer to us. They have to answer to the people. They have to answer to the constituents. And we will continue to be out there to prove that message every day and to show them just that. And what came out of that was perhaps a town hall that we will be conducting in the city of Trenton, a place where I know no Republican has ever done that before. It's basically 50+% black, it's 30% plus Hispanic out there, and it's just not an area that the typical Republican has touched before. But I want to make sure that I'm getting out there, expanding the Republican name, bringing the Republican Party into these areas to show people that we're serious about what we're talking about, and to show them that we have empathy and we understand the plight, and we're going to do what we can to help them overcome these things. So the campaign is going great. I got a great team. There's a lot of excitement in New Jersey, and I'm just going to keep my head down and keep marching forward and hopefully get this win in November.
Well, no, I'm very curious because a few years ago, and I want to talk about a couple of things that are in the headlines as well, but a few years ago, I was working in Louisiana on the Senate race against Mary Landry down there. And I was going into black neighborhoods, you know, talking about the Republican candidate. And the residents of those neighborhoods had never had a Republican come to their door and ask them for their vote. And then when I was in Baton Rouge after that, a couple of years later, during the Alton Sterling riots that were going on down there, I was one of a few journalists who were arrested. And I was in the cell, and there was about 25 other people who'd been arrested there. They were all black. And they were, you know, protesting against the Alton Sterling thing. And I don't BS about who I am. So they said, "Why are you in here?" And I said, "I'm a reporter for Breitbart," and so on. And one of the guys I was talking to, young black man, was like, "Wait, you're Republican?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And he said, and a lot of people think the next line, because they don't understand, that's what I'm getting at. They think the next thing would be the guy would punch me in the face. But you know, I think, Darius, that's not what happened. What he did was he said, "All right, let me ask you something," because he'd never talked to a Republican. Have you found that when you go out, people aren't this angry thing you see on social media sometimes, but they're more curious because they've literally, in some cases, never had a Republican actually speak to them. They've seen them on TV, but they've never talked to one. And my experience in talking to folks is that they were curious, not angry. And they had questions. Have you found that to be the case when you've gone out and talked to people?
I actually have found that the case to be 1,000%. And I'll take it a step further. First of all, I'll say this. Of the 12,000 doors that we knocked on, just off the top of my mind, I can only think of 3 or 4 incidences where we actually had a problem, where somebody became combative or whatever the case is because of who we were and because of our policies. And in all 3 or 4 of those cases, it was white liberals that had a problem. And remember, I've talked to hundreds, if not thousands, of black Democrats as well during this process. Every single black Democrat that I've ever talked to in the last year when I've been canvassing has said, I agree. I agree with school choice. I agree with term limits. I agree I want lower taxes. I agree with your international policy and with us not, being the policemen of the world. They all agree with these things, every single last one of them. In fact, I'll take it a step further, where one of the complaints that I got a lot was no politicians have come to their doors throughout the last couple election cycles. And I think that's indicative of these politicians really being in office, really thinking that they own these seats, really thinking that there is no challenge to their power. And they've just gotten so comfortable where they don't feel like they have to do anything. And in fact, we actually forced the Democrats in my town to start coming out, because the next time we came to that same community about a week later, one of the ladies told us, oh, yeah, they came out to my door the other day. And she said they haven't done that in 6-7 years, but all of a sudden they showed up at our door. So that's why we need to stay ahead of the curve. We need to stay energized. And you're absolutely, absolutely right. And that's why I say these people are waiting for somebody to show them that we actually care. We're not just coming there for votes like Democrats are, because the Democrats already have that sewed up. They go out there, they spew all this nonsense, they tell them what they're going to do for them, and then at the end of the day, they get elected and they don't do what they're going to say. Perfect example, President Trump. Ice Cube meets with President Trump before the election, and President Trump tells him, you know what, I got this platinum plan that I would love to present to Black America and see what we can do about uplifting these neighborhoods. $500 billion right off the top. He goes to the Joe Biden campaign at the time, and they tell him, you know what, we'll talk to you after the election. Guess what? They still haven't talked to Ice Cube, and it's been almost a year since that election. So I think you're absolutely right, and this is what I've actually noticed throughout this, and what's really energized me is the fact that I do know a lot of people in these neighborhoods are ready for change. I'll tell you this, last week when I was at that protest, I was actually very shocked. Right? It was only black people. These are all Democrats, because this is Trenton, New Jersey, so that's one of their strongholds. One of the ladies came up to me and said, you know what, it's really sickening how much Democrats are really trying to cheat nowadays. She said it wasn't solicited. She came up to me and said this, and I was surprised because I don't typically hear, especially black Democrats, talk about that. Anytime we hear about election fraud or anything like this, it's only conspiracy theory, MAGA hat wearing conservatives that think anything, nefarious is ever going on. And she was very, very adamant about explaining to me that they see what's going on. They see how the Democrats are trying to cheat in different ways. I mean, listen, we have a president here telling us that we need election reforms right now after supposedly being the president or the nominee that got the most votes of any president in the history of our country. But yet they're telling us we need election reform under the guise of not enough people having access. So it's not just Republicans that understand the nonsensical approach that these people are taking and the things that they're saying. It's people in these neighborhoods as well. Another older gentleman there told me, he said, listen, we understand this. We understand that Democrats come into this area like Trenton. They depend on low information voters here, and that's how they get their message across and just bank on people going to the polls, voting because they don't know any better. So the people that actually know, the people that are actually politically astute and politically involved in these areas understand to a large degree what's going on, and they do want to change things. What we have to do as Republicans is make sure not only that we go into these areas, especially when you have a candidate like myself that comes from these areas, that lives in these areas, that understands these areas and has a real soft spot for them and a lot of empathy for them. You need to make sure you get behind these type of candidates and go into these areas, but we also need to make sure that there's follow-up. Because I can go, and one thing I noticed is I can go knock on 12,000 doors, right? And 3,000 of those doors be, let's say, black Democrats that live in the urban city of Trenton, New Jersey. I can go there once, speak to them, and let's say 90% of them tell me that they agree with me, they agree with my policies. Unless we follow up, unless we go back and show them that we're going to be the change that they want to see, it won't even matter how many doors I knock on. So it's not about just going out there initially. We have to continue to go out there, continue to show people that we care, continue to show them how our policies will affect and immediately change their lives. And I think if we put a cognizant, thorough effort of that, not just here in New Jersey, but across this country, you will see things change for the better when it comes to these communities. And I'll say one last thing on this. One thing I noticed, I was in Trenton, New Jersey about 3 weeks ago, because I go out there knocking on doors. I brought a COVID truck out there for people to get free testing. If they had symptoms, they need to get tested. So I'm out there with my people, and I see a group of people across the street just standing on the corner talking. So naturally, me just being the jovial, person that I am, I just walked over there and started talking to people. Clearly, obviously, I told them that I was a Republican, what I was running for. So I actually handed everybody in the circle, probably about 8 to 10 people, my card and my door hanger. Everybody took my information except for one lady. I got to one lady, and she was like, no, thank you. And I understood why she said that, right? Because she just went off that I'm a Republican, so automatically she may think I just believe certain things and I'm one kind of way. So I kept talking, and what I started talking about to them was, and this was really interesting because this is one of the issues I think really resonates with the Black community, I started talking to them about how the illegal immigrant community, as well as non-citizens, as we've always said, are going to eventually usurp their vote within the Democratic Party, because Democrats already don't care about your vote. They just say what they need to say just to get the vote. And as you can see, as it always is, they don't do much for you when they're actually in office. And I started talking to them about even a law that was just passed in New York where you're sitting here calling us all conspiracy theories. Nobody wants to believe it's going to happen. But guess what? New York is just putting a law where now non-citizens can vote in their local elections. I started talking about that, and I started talking about how Black people really need to diversify their political affiliation. When I got done talking about that, that same lady that declined to take my stuff looked at me and said, I'm sold. Please give me your stuff, and we'll be in touch.
Well, that was great. Great job. Curtis Mayfield is I'm sure you get that all the time, Darius.
I do.
I see the Mayfield, sorry about that. But, Darius Mayfield.
Relative.
Oh, really?
Yes, he really is.
Well, he's one bad mother. I'll shut my mouth now. But no, that's great. Again, forgive me. I screw up like that sometimes. I actually called Keith Richards Keith Moon the other day, which is another rock and roll faux pas. But Darius Mayfield, great job. Let me ask you, we don't have much time left. We only got about a minute to discuss this. But with Russia and Ukraine, I got to say, I think a lot of Republicans are getting played. The idea that Joe Biden's not being tough enough on Russia is, let me point out that in 2014, the Obama administration, with Joe Biden as vice president, actually overthrew a democratically elected government in Ukraine because they said they were too pro-Russian. That's pretty tough. It's tough in the wrong direction, and it's completely anti-democratic. And I think what the Democrats are doing is they're trying to push the Republicans, who they know are tougher, into taking an anti-Russia position. It's the same position that big Democratic funders like George Soros have taken. Do you think so? Why do you think Russia's bad? What's wrong with Russia, Darius? Let me just put it that way.
I definitely would understand what you're saying in that sense, and that may be some of their calculation. Here's what I can tell you. I think, especially out here, a lot of conservatives and Republicans are mad at the weakness of this administration. If we remember, the last time Russia tried to annex any type of a country or invade any country was under another Democratic president, Mr. Barack Obama, when they took Crimea.
But let me point out, in the Crimea they voted to join Russia, right? They overwhelmingly voted, correct? And that Obama opposed it. So I don't understand why the Republicans are taking the Democrats' position. Why do the people of Crimea have a right to do something that makes them happy? And they're better off now. Do they have a right to do that?
And I do understand Crimea is definitely more overwhelmingly Russian. There's a lot of Russian natives that occupy Crimea. So I definitely understand that. I think what people are upset about is just the weakness of this administration. Listen.
But hey, we're out of time. Great job. Darius Mayfield running for up in New Jersey, running for office up there. Thanks again to Mark Sloboda. We'll be back tomorrow with the best damn radio show in the world. We ran out of time, unfortunately. Thanks, everybody.